What is good people? You are now listening to another episode of Since We Last Spoke with Danny Foxworth. I am your humble narrator, Danny Foxworth, and once again, we are joined. Saying this man is an extremely special guest will be a gross understatement, ladies and gentlemen. Let me tell y'all something. I had the pleasure of being introduced to this brother by way of Columbia's unofficial mayor, Priest Jacobs.
Yeah,
And
that's the mayor
man,
of the city for sure.
absolutely. And we built such a great rapport over the years. And I'm so hyped
hmm
that I was able to get this man on my podcast tonight. So, y'all, from the Boogie Down Bronx, the world's most
That's right.
electrifying
BX Borough.
psychologist, man, black
hmm
sci-fi author, speculative
hmm
fiction scribe. We're going to get into all of that stuff,
hmm
man. Knicks fan all
hmm
day long. Ladies and
hmm
gentlemen,
hmm
we got Dr. Napoleon Wells in the building. Doc, what's
Yeah.
good, man?
Good to be here, man. Good to be here with you, brother. I'm glad that we are taking this time to have this conversation, man. I've been following the pod. I've been really invested and heavy into making sure that I'm present when my folks are present and they're doing these things, man. So, brother, I'm glad to be here. Glad to be present with you on your ascension as you make your way forward with this thing, man. And I'm glad you stuck to it. I see so many folks, man, they just stop. And I'm like, nah, your energy is good around it, man. So, brother, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having
Yeah, thank you for being on, man. That seriously,
me.
that means the world to me. So we're going to take it back to the very beginning. Growing up in the
hmm
Bronx, what was
Yeah,
what was
yeah,
life like in the BX for young Napoleon?
yeah. So I was a kid primarily in the 80s and then into the 90s in the Bronx. And so we're talking about the height of the crack era. And crack had just arrived. So you have crime being rampant, which it always was in the Bronx, man. Crack before and after the crack era, really. But I recall my childhood being full of a lot of, I would say, moments that shaped who I eventually became, as it is the same for all people, right? There was violence around, sure, but there was a lot of happiness. One of the things I remember is, like most of New York, the Bronx is full of culture. We're the borough that has the most Latinx families and people and communities. So it was always in my mind like Black people, individuals who are brown. Even there was a couple of neighborhoods that had Cambodian communities not far from where I lived over by St. James Park. So we got to know each other. There was a sense of misunderstanding a lot of the time, but there was a kind of acceptance that took place as well. I think a part of what I learned very early on in childhood, man, was you had to be swift, you had to be smart, but you had to stand on what your principles were, right? Someone was going to try and push you off of those. And so I learned to be assertive. Early on, I learned how to kind of watch my environment, how to pay attention to the strengths of other people, how to try to build other people who may not have felt as strong. I was always making certain that whatever space I occupied, I tried to be firm in that space. And then I had a family which accepted that I wanted to do things the way that I did and had the interest that I had. So I rode a skateboard, which was not common for my neighborhood. All right. So me and a couple of other kids who found each other and we would ride in the park, we had to defend each other, right? And that meant you're gonna have to put these up because somebody's gonna have some shit, excuse me, have some things to say,
You can
you
say
know,
shit,
to
let it
us.
fly.
Yeah, yeah, had some shit to say, right? So we were gonna have to stand on those principles, right? We got heavily into comic books, we got heavily into hip hop, we got heavily into breakdancing, we got heavily into graffiti art, we got heavily into anime at that time. I think any interest that was open to us, the Bronx had a small version of it, and New York had a larger version. So I had a family that pushed me toward exploring without limits whatever it is I wanted to get into. We didn't have much money. All of the Bronx is still poor, to this day. But we had families, and I remember mine especially, they pushed me toward those things. I had a parent who, unfortunately, my father who has passed, he was an alcoholic for much of my time growing up. Well,
Oh
my
wow.
entire life, with him actually. And so he was a violent alcoholic. So being away from home and making sense of, okay, what's happening at home, having a mother who pushed us to do well. And when my father was sober, he pushed us to do well. So he was this very conflicted person who was at home with us. in the midst of a borough where crack is running rampant, but there's also this vibrant life, there's vibrant fun, there's this vibrant music, there's vibrant art. I felt like I had access to everything. Even though I had very little at home, I could go and experience almost whatever I wanted to. That was kind of what the Bronx was like, man. Still love the Bronx. Not trying to live there ever again, but I still love it. Absolutely.
So taking it back to skateboarding, because like yourself, I was huge into skateboarding as a youngin. So what was it that drew you to skateboarding?
I think I saw a kid in the park who was on a skateboard, and he was on what at the time we called the longboard, but it was really just a fatty that he was on. And I saw him trying to learn tricks. I saw him trying to learn kick flips, and I saw him trying to get it down and practice it and try to get better at it. And I asked my father about it. Now, he didn't work very much. And for the brief period of time that he did, I was like, now might be a time for me to try and ask him, see what happens. And he got me a skinny. It was a Bruce Lee skinny, blackboard right on the top, Bruce Lee right on the bottom. And if you had one of those, usually we had those that were fake. They were the official ones, but you could get a fake one and it'd be a skinny, a smaller board for less. As soon as I got my hands on it, I was like, I need to go find that kid. And I didn't run into him for a while, but I took my board out to St. James and I started to just practice in any and every way. And you're a rider, you know yourself, man. You get out there on a skateboard, the first thing you're going to do is fall a lot.
Yes.
Because if you're trying to get those kick flips down, you're trying to get your balance down. And skateboarding, quite honestly, is mostly about directing the board as opposed to riding it. I know people will say riding a skateboard. You're not really riding it. Once you get comfortable on a board, you almost only have to move a little bit in order for the board to literally obey you,
Yeah.
in a sense. And once I got more comfortable on the board, then I started to do tricks. Then I started to get invested in how do we make this better. I didn't get very good, right? But
Right.
just being out there and being able to do it with 4 or 5 of the kids from a couple of surrounding neighborhoods, man, we just had fun. We just had a good time with it.
And
Yeah.
just like yourself, talking about trying to learn the kicks, like trying to learn all the tricks and I mean, I still can't land a kick flip, but for me,
Listen.
I think that was my first foray into finding fun in failing. Because
Uh-huh.
I mean, back then I spent countless hours. I mean, it took forever for me just to successfully land an ollie.
Yeah.
I mean, I busted my ass a million times, but then when I actually stuck the landing on that ollie, that was the best feeling in the world.
Joy. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you mentioned that one of your other hobbies growing up was, or one of your other passions growing up was in comic books. So how did you get into comic books?
Really, I'm going to say it was my father probably who guided me toward comics.
Okay.
I can recall the very first comic that I got my hands on. It was a Thing comic, right? And I wasn't aware of the Fantastic Four at that point, but became quickly aware that he was a member of the Fantastic Four. And for me, it was the Fantastic Four, Alpha Flight, X-Men quickly became one that I followed. New Mutants was another comic that I spent a lot of time with. And I guess being as young as I was and obsessive a personality as I could be, I started to try to track down as many comics as I could that had conflicted characters in them. I became a fan of Namor. And I know plenty of people will suggest, Namor is not really conflicted, but he is. Right? He's half Atlantean, half human. And I know what Black Panther did with the Namor character, which I was a little disappointed with. Another conversation for another day. But the Atlantean Namor kind of stuck with me because he didn't take shit about his background and his heritage, which was one thing, but he also had this insecurity that he was living with. It's what made him try to be a hero, then an anti-hero. And really, it was through him I first became aware of anti-heroes. And then Wolverine, to a degree, and the X-Men, and the Thing being as complicated as he was, and then looking into the Fantastic Four and the Avengers. And that led me in short order to looking into Black comic books, which came really in my teenage years, is when you started to see many more of those labels. Milestone came about at that time. Image brought in a couple of Black heroes that they tried to do some good work with. But I think comics for me, being what the Bronx was and what childhood was and what poverty was, I imagine that comic books served as a kind of escape for me, right? It let me get away from a lot of what was happening, right? That I was mindful of, right? You know, my father was, as I mentioned, he was drunk a lot, right? There was violence outside of those doors. My older brother was having a hard time of things emotionally, right? You know, I'm trying to make sense of it. And I think comics just allowed me for 23, 24 pages at a time just to escape. I read a lot of books, and it was amazing to get into those stories, but comics had these characters that I thought were so much bolder than most of the characters that I came across in the books that I was reading. You know, I always had a book in my hand. But on Friday, when I got my allowance, let me go and get those comics, man. If I was able to put a couple bucks together, let me go and get those comics. And they were relatively cheap. I think when I started reading comic books, they were 25, 35 cents a comic.
Okay.
Right? That's literally what they cost to get a comic book. I mean, and inflation has made it so that now I'm pretty sure comics are about 4 or 5. You know, the last time I read a full comic sat down, I read a Ninjak comic, and that was maybe 2 years ago, and it was a graphic novel. No, the full graphic novelization of John Wick is what I read, the prequel novelization, which was amazing as a graphic novel. But just like that, comics allowed me to have a departure for a period of time. It was like jumping on a spaceship. So very different, and people are able to change lives, and people work through conflict, and people save other people, and people struggle with their powers, and people are powerful. I think it really allowed me in many ways to have an experience which was far outside of where I was. I think it allowed me to cope a lot of the time in reality.
Wow. And so who was the first black comic book character that you were really drawn to?
Well, I'm probably going to say Falcon. Falcon was, for me, was big, and I think just the fact that he was in Harlem and he was black. No, I'm wrong. I read Power Man and Iron Fist, so Luke Cage probably was the
Okay.
first one to impact me, and that was back when they had Luke Cage saying all types of bullshit. Back at that point, like there's that issue where he comes across Doctor Doom, like he's chasing down Doctor Doom because Doctor Doom apparently owes him money. He knocks a hole in Doctor Doom's wall and is basically threatening him for his money. Like that kind of thing back in the day. You had that kind of characterization of Luke Cage at that point, but Luke Cage was a big one. I came across T'Challa a little bit later, and he wasn't as fully realized the character as he is now.
Mm-hmm.
You only saw Wakanda occasionally, right? And then you had what came about when Wakanda really, I think, in the minds of comic book fans, where it became real for those who read comics, probably the Doom Wars, right? Because it was such a rich story and had Wakanda at the heart of everything, right? And I'm hoping that they eventually do tell that. But then you make your way forward. You have your Static Shock, who's operating in the background. Black Lightning over on the DC side was another one. Cyborg was big to me because Cyborg was so incredibly intelligent. Right? I thought it was huge to have a hero like Cyborg. Storm was always there. And here's the thing. I will tell people Storm is the most important superhero that has ever been created and developed for a couple of reasons, right? And the best arc with Storm is when she didn't have powers. I don't know if you were reading X-Men at the time when she was with Forge, her boyfriend.
Yeah, no, I'm not familiar.
All right, so she has all her powers. She's one of the most powerful beings in all of Marvel, right? She starts messing with Forge. Forge creates this tool that can take the powers from mutants, accidentally uses it on Storm.
Oh,
Storm loses her powers. That was when Storm first started wearing the Mohawk. So she's wearing the Mohawk, the leather vest. That was when she became the leader of the Morlocks, when she went on ahead and beat Callisto in single combat, when she was the leader of the X-Men with no powers, when they were battling the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Can't get me going on Storm, bro. Like Storm is without doubt the most important of all the mutants that has ever lived. No question.
man. So your college experience. I always wanted to talk about that and just to pick your
Yeah,
brain about how college life was for you. So
yeah.
first of all, what swayed you towards pursuing psychology as a career?
Yeah, I will tell you, like most psychologists, we're trying to make sense of ourselves and our families, usually. And some psychologists wouldn't acknowledge that. They would say they find it interesting, but at the core of us, we're trying to make sense of people and what we see, right? And psychology for me, I respect all healers, right? All of them. But to be a psychologist, you have to be stubbornly dedicated to the science of people, right? You have life coaches who want to help people, you have LPCs and social workers who want to help people. Psychologists are scientists that are invested in understanding people. And sometimes that doesn't always mean that they ideally want to help people. I'm not one of those, but many of those exist.
Right.
For me, I wanted to make sense of why my father was the way he was, so aggressive, why he couldn't kick alcohol, why he couldn't work, why he couldn't love his family, why was he so aggressive toward us and toward other people, why he was so self-hating at times, why my older brother was struggling. And I learned later in life as I started to develop my understanding of the science, like, no, man, it's bipolar disorder. That's what they're
Wow.
struggling with. This is what, my brother's on medication. My father was never formally diagnosed, but I saw the symptoms between the two of them being nearly identical. And I wanted to understand psychology, and I wanted to understand how it affected people and how people heal, and how experience makes it so that we begin to behave differently, and how it changes our lives and how it changes our trajectory, and what it meant for me and for my sister and for our community. And when I was a freshman at Morehouse, I took a Black psychology course. Right at the time, I wasn't a psychology major, but the course was so fascinating and it explained so much to me. I was like, man, no, this is a whole major. Let me get into this because I can learn more and then I can do more. And then I learned how little our community engages its mental health, and we don't have those conversations, and how we cope very conveniently, and how alcoholism and how drug use was such a problem, and how generational curses existed. And then I again leaned in because I learned, you know what, I can be of a benefit to my community directly. I can be of a benefit in explaining these things to our people and to our elders and to our children, and hopefully moving them on a path of self understanding and self realization and self discovery. So, yeah, psychology for me kind of became almost a movement. It became a purpose for me. In many ways, I felt like a hero of sorts, right? I can come in, I can help someone do better. And for me, it was a close association to the X-Men. I'm not always going to make it right, but I'm going to be there for it. And I'm going to help you. I'm going to stand beside you. And don't think of me as a hero. Think of me as a person who was present, right? So I think it just pulled a lot of things full circle for me.
And after Morehouse, where did you continue your studies?
Yeah, I went to Fordham University, man, for my grad school work in New York. So I was back to New York after being in Atlanta, and had met my wife down in Atlanta. Well, she wasn't my wife at the time, but girlfriend down in Atlanta. And so now we're long distance. I'm going to graduate school in New York. She's going to graduate school in Chicago.
Oh,
She
wow.
was at Northwestern. Yeah,
Okay.
so we're trying to make it work. Two youngsters trying to develop into professionals from a distance. She's a computer scientist. I'm a psychologist. So, excuse me, we had, I think, a lot of growing to do with each other. And what Fordham allowed for me to do, it gave me another 5-year window to not only grow into an adult, but also to learn exactly how I wanted to be different than the family structure that I came from. They taught me a lot and gave me a lot of tools, but how did I want to be better? How did I want to break generational curses? And I got to be at home around many of them while doing it. My brother had already left. He had gone to prison a couple of times. My sister had moved to Minnesota, but my mom was still in the Bronx. So I was able to work through some things with her, some things we weren't able to. Right. But I was in position where I was learning why so many family dynamics existed the way that they did. Right. And I wasn't diagnosing my family. I was more giving them grace. This is what happened. Let me try and understand my mother and my father's family backgrounds and how it shaped them. And then that's what they brought to us. I think being in graduate school in New York gave me a lot of rich experiences and rich opportunities. It also meant that I was poor. I was incredibly poor for much of grad school, as most grad students are. But being and living in New York City and being poor is a different kind of poor. So it's like being a graduate student in San Francisco. You're going to be really broke in those instances. So it took a lot of creativity. Still a very rich experience. It was like growing up in the Bronx, man, like poor but fun. And I felt grad school was a lot of that as well. A lot of hard work, but we could always find a means to have a good time away from it.
What was your favorite course at Fordham?
It's a good question. Probably psychopathology, because it is the closest to what is abnormal psychology on the undergrad level, but it's where you gain an expert's understanding of psychiatric disorders. Like, here is what is wrong, and let's dive into it. And so when people say, oh, yeah, so and so is crazy, we're learning what's crazy and what's not. Right. So I never used the word crazy. I never even used the word disturbed. I think of it in terms of illness and sickness, and I put it on that kind of spectrum in terms of what people are going through. So that for me was it was fun. Shouldn't have been, but it was a great time because I was learning so much. That's what that actually is. That's what those symptoms mean. That's how it affects life. Like, all of that came into play.
Man, it's very important that you have fun while you're learning. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so pursuing your doctorate degree, what was your thesis about?
Yeah, so my dissertation focused on adjustment with African American college students and the things that impact young Black people, men and women, and individuals and families. How is our adjustment impacted, and how do we go about adjusting to trauma? How do we go about adjusting to grief? And what I wanted to know is, what are the things that we use? Because we weren't always using therapy. We weren't always using psychiatric medication. We weren't always using counseling. So what are we using to adjust and cope? And what I found in my dissertation was, we're using religiosity, we use faith, we use family, we use work, unfortunately, in a lot of instances. And so a lot of what I learned was, Black people have tools that they have always used for wellness, and often it's a matter of shaping those tools for the moment that we're in. Right? We might say in our heads, man, people are using God too much. They're addicted to the church and their faith, but that's what a lot of our community had to cope and still has to cope. So is there a way we can use that tool to make it healthy and not make it a narcotic for our people? Can we use connection and not make it a narcotic? Can we use our family structures and the strength we draw from our matriarchs and our patriarchs and being together? Can we use that and not make it a narcotic? Right? I think I learned, no, we do it differently. We have been counseling ourselves, but in different ways. We have been using therapy approaches, just not Western ones and not typical ones. Right? So we were still here, still adjusted, and how? Well, it's by using other means. Right. So it even put me in a place where I was like, you know what, man, we don't necessarily have to have traditional psychotherapy be the only answer. There are things that we can use, and there are ways we can approach this, which can be more effective. And it doesn't have to be shopping. It doesn't have to be drugs. It doesn't have to be alcohol. It doesn't have to be the club. It doesn't have to be partying, but it can be those two. Well, not the drugs and alcohol, but can we have a good time in a way that doesn't make it a narcotic? And so we're not only distracting ourselves, but we're processing the grief of the day. We're processing the stress of work. We're processing the trauma of being unseen in a white world. Like, can we use the things that we do? And often we do. Often we do.
And so applying all of the things that you learned in college and then venturing out and actually going into the psychology field, what was that like for you initially?
For me, there was no real kind of slow work your way up adjustment period. My internship, which is one of the things professional psychologists have to have in order to complete their degree, it was at the VA hospital. And so I thought in my head, well, here's what that's going to look like. And I was terribly unprepared. I was prepared in one sense, right? One of my training experiences as a graduate student was at the Bellevue Hospital in New York City, which is kind of like a head hospital, right? And it was my very first training experience, and it was at the Program for Survivors of Torture. So that was my introduction to actually working with patients, right? And so I'm in
Man.
my head like, I've done that successfully, and I've made my way through that, and I've done a good job of that. So when I make it to the VA, I'm going to be prepared. And much of what I discovered is now working with veterans and their families, you just don't always know what's going to come through the door. You're not fully aware of that. And so you have to be mindful of not knowing it all. I had to ask a lot of questions. I had an elder veteran in Alabama. I did my internship at the Tuskegee VA. He pulled me aside and he said, "You're going to be good because you have mother wit. And that mother wit's going to take you a long way." And I had to have him explain it to me. And he's like, "No, man, you know, a lot of the vets are Black. You come in and you know how to defer to them. You make them feel like father or uncle, brother. You get down on one knee with us and you work with us." And that always stayed with me, always making sure that I was not the sage on the stage or the expert standing above from the podium looking down at those who I was treating. Let me get eye to eye with them, shoulder to shoulder with them. And then let me bring my tools. What are the tools that you bring in? Let's try to fix this. Let's make some sense of it. I think it
I,
was an educational year.
I love that. Just meeting them where they are.
Absolutely. Important to do. Important to do. I
Yes.
think we've lost sight of doing that with many of our young right now. You know, we
Yeah.
see them as difficult and don't spend as much time meeting them where they are as we should. And they're distracted. And I think often we miss out on opportunities, no doubt.
100%. So when did you, let's see, when did you know, when was that, what was that moment that you knew that you were the world's most electrifying psychologist?
Yeah, I think when I started getting calls to literally lecture and speak and to appear, that's when it started to occur to me, I have something here. Right. When I started getting those calls, and then in speaking and working with other psychologists that weren't quite reaching people in the way that I was like, nah, it's me. It's me. I'm number one at it. You know, there's a reason why my patients love me, their families love me, why I keep getting the calls that I'm getting, why I get a call to do the TED talk that I did, why, in fact, I'm invited to South by Southwest. Like, I, in fact, am working in a way that other psychologists sometimes are, but they're not pulling all of that together. Right. I know a lot of the best psychologists in the world. Big shouts to Dr. Moises Rodriguez over on the West Coast, working with our young, keeping them healthy. Big shouts to Dr. Shari Dade, working with
Yes.
literally also in the VA hospital, doing good work through the central office. There are a lot of the very best that I know personally, and I see how they work. Really, when I think about it, when I think of the very best, I just consider myself the first among equals. Right? You know, we all do amazing work. What I feel is what I bring to the table is the understanding of how to move in so many different spaces. Right? If you think of me as a basketball player, I'm a scorer, distributor, rebounder, good defensive player, and I can help coach. Right? That's all that I bring to the table. I can, as a psychologist, consult. I can lead groups, work individually. I can go about the business of building wellness practices and developing therapies. All of those things I've helped to do.
Pop your shit, man.
Yeah, listen, man, I'm a bad man. I'm a bad man. No, they do not work like I do. You know what I mean? They simply don't. And it's okay.
I love
It's
it.
okay. Hmm.
So when did you move to Columbia, South Carolina?
Moved here end of 2011, beginning of 2012. My wife, I mentioned, she is a computer scientist. She was doing some work out at Clemson. And we were in Auburn, Alabama at the time. I was working at the Montgomery VA, Tuskegee VA, both. And so I wanted for her having followed me the beginning portion of my career, I wanted her to have the opportunity to be a little closer to the work that she wanted to do. And so an opportunity opened up at Columbia as her time with Clemson was winding down. So we looked at Columbia, um, really, I think very boldly decided, no, let's take the plunge, right? I was doing work different than what I had done previously. I was a trauma specialist and I was moving into a primary care mental health integration position, which is I'm in primary care, but mental health and immediately available to patients in primary care. So somebody with a report a mental health issue when they're in primary care, you go to your usual doc. If you report something to mental health, they got to refer you.
Okay.
On the VA side, we in fact had primary care mental health specialists, myself included, right in primary care. If you tell your doc, you see me that day, no need to refer out. We're going to make sure, because we learned if folks walk out that door, we're not always going to get them back for the referral. So let's catch them while they're here, right,
Yeah.
to see to mental health. And it really was a very effective program. And in moving to South Carolina, I think for me, it was almost a full circle moment for my family. So I'll disclose something. I am a member of the Carolina Baptist Church in the Bronx, New York. And all of you who are hearing this right now can look up Carolina Baptist Church, 225th Street, Bronx, New York. The church is still there. The church is still standing. It's below the 1 train right on Broadway in the Bronx, right? My granddad, also Napoleon Wells, was the Reverend Napoleon Wells. He started the church.
Wow.
He's from South Carolina. So he's from Columbia. And my grandmother is from, Now, my grandmother, I thought she was from Sumter. While I was growing up, she would tell me she was from Sumter. She would tell anyone who would ask. So I get to Morehouse. I meet my best friend, Brother George Winley, Reverend George Winley, who still lives here in South Carolina. He comes with me to the Bronx. We go and we see my grandmother. And she starts kind of chuckling. She looks like she's sweating a little bit. And I'm like, Grandma, what's going on? You from Sumter? Like, both of you are from Sumter. George is from Sumter. You're from Sumter. Come to find out, she's actually from a town called Dalzell, South Carolina, not Sumter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my roots are in the state of South Carolina. My grandparents met each other in Harlem during the Great Migration. All of the folks in the Great Migration, what I think most of us realize, folks move from different states in the South to correspond with family and friends who are all moving north. So you have like Alabama and Mississippi and Tennessee are like Michigan, Ohio, like right, Illinois right there in the Midwest. North, South Carolina, Virginia, those folks moved, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Connecticut, New York City. So the bonds are there. Right, the bonds were always there. The church I grew up in was mostly folks who were from South Carolina, all over the state, from the Midlands all the way down to the coast. Right, so those are the folks I grew up with, worshiped with, and was around. So moving back to South Carolina for me, in many ways, knowing that I had some family here, I already had some roots. It took some getting used to. But I tell folks, no, it doesn't only feel like home. It feels for me kind of like a return, bringing some of the seeds that my family brought to New York kind of back home and planting them here, where they, in fact, were first cultivated, where they were first nourished. And the state of South Carolina has not only made me a son, I think, but has promoted me in many ways. I feel invincible whenever I walk around the state. Folks accept me everywhere that I'm going. Some of my greatest accomplishments have happened right here in this state, right? They've happened right here with the support of folks born and raised in South Carolina. I tell folks, Black South Carolinians, I'm not talking about all, but Black South Carolinians want you to do well. They want to see you do well. They want you to work at it and will not only give you a pat on the back, but will give you a hard shove, like go do it. There's not only support, but I find that there is this sound nourishment that exists in some of the beauty that is here. You yourself, you go to different parts of the state and it feels different.
Yeah.
Right. I get down on the coast. There is something about hearing that coastal kind of Charleston, Moncks Corner area accent, man. Like it feels like home. It feels warm. Like it feels like family. Like that you are welcome when you hear it.
Mm-hmm.
In every way. Like you even look at the skin tones and the complexions of our people, something different and rich and cocoa butter about that dark down on the coast. You know what I mean? Like the food's prepared differently. I got to experience all of that being back in the state of South Carolina, and it's been beautiful.
So what was the biggest adjustment from being from the Bronx and being and then living in South Carolina?
I would say that it's New York is such a different place. And I don't say that to heap praise on New York, man. Anybody who's been to New York, kind of knows it's busy, it's crowded, It moves at a different kind of pace. I think the biggest adjustment for me was getting a sense of how people saw themselves. Like I had to slow down some. And I had lived in the South for a number of years. I had lived in Atlanta, which doesn't always feel truly like the South. I lived in Auburn, Alabama, which really was a small town masquerading as a city. So it was very quiet. But the speed of things in South Carolina, when I first got here, I had to adjust to, right? The personalities of many of the folks, which I thought were beautiful. I still had to adjust to. I had to bring my aggression down, had to
Mhm.
bring my rate of speed down with regard to trying to get things done. But then what I started to come across was meeting a lot of New Yorkers who were here in the state of South Carolina, who, like myself, had made that reverse migration
Yeah.
from the Northeast, back to the Southeast. And so there was a lot of home that was here. And then I think South Carolina has some of the best of everything, and it just hasn't been discovered yet, right? Like, I am a writer, and in meeting some of the brilliant minds who are writers who are here, meeting some of the brilliant hip hop artists who are here, meeting some of the brilliant young musicians who are here, meeting some of the brilliant young artists who are here. I wish in many ways that South Carolina as a whole, as a state, would just bully up shoulder to shoulder and like, let's go get it. Let's make everybody great. I've mentioned before, I feel like the state is waiting on greatness. It's waiting on becoming, and we can have that moment like Atlanta had over 20 years ago when it was like, you may not listen to our music, but we are going to listen to Atlanta.
Yes.
And so we're buying everything up. We're pushing everything. And I'm hoping that the state of South Carolina eventually, shoulder to shoulder, now we're making everybody a star. Everybody here is going to be what they need to be, right? I think the potential is there. And that energy is here in the state because there are brilliant, brilliant minds and beautiful souls here.
Couldn't agree more. Could not agree more.
Hmm.
So let's get into the book writing, man. So
Yeah, yeah,
Black
yeah.
sci-fi author or Black speculative
Yeah,
fiction. And I wasn't
yeah,
familiar with the term Black speculative fiction
yeah.
until I became familiar with your work. So
Hmm.
talk about that, man. I'm curious as
Yeah.
to hear
So,
how you got into writing the black sci-fi books.
mhm. um, it began for me, I think, like it probably has for a lot of Black speculative fiction fans and writers. I read a lot of sci-fi, but I didn't see enough of us in our lives and our skin and our voices in those worlds. And they were worlds that were everywhere, different dimensions, alternate histories. And what I find to be so rich about speculative fiction, and some will say Afrofuturism, is it imagines a different future. It imagines a different reality, right? Where Black people are central to everything. My work takes place primarily in space and Africa. Those two, right? That's where a lot of that is. All of my main characters are Black, African, from the diaspora. They have our voices, they have our sensibility. Much of what we've done, those of us who write it, is we've created realities we haven't seen, which was important to do, which was necessary to do. If I don't see a brilliant Black anti-hero, I need to create that hero. If I don't have a world that they can live in where they're fully realized, I need to create that world. If I don't see a Black female supervillain that is a genius megalomaniac, I need to create that. I need to write that. I need to build that into my story. And so that's a lot of what influenced me, is wanting to contribute in that way because I'm not seeing it. So I'm going to build it. And then when I started seeing it, I was like, let me add my voice to it. Let me bring my talent to it. Let me bring my willingness and soul to it. And so, I was able to start to write. And like a lot of writers, what you become concerned with is anyone going to want to read this? Is anyone going to care about this? And I fortunately found a small audience who have loved much of what I've done, and found a publisher in MV Media and a brilliant mind in Milton Davis as an editor. And they've like, we believe in it and we believe in you and we want to read it. And most everyone who has come across it has responded to it positively. So 3 short stories in, well, going on 4, with the Jasper Project coming up here in South Carolina shortly, and then working on my big novel. So yeah, it's been a good time, and I'm hoping that it influences a lot of youngsters who want to build those worlds. The next step for me, working on animation, working on comic, working on expanding the story that I have as much as is possible. So Corey Jetboy Davis, he and I are going to be doing some work in the very near future to make sure that I take the world I've built and then expand it. And I've been influenced, my work directly has been influenced by a lot of the artists right here in the state. Like, you know, Dogon Krieger has been a heavy influence of mine. Thomas Washington has been an influence of mine. Dre Lopez has been a heavy influence of mine. Cedric Umoja, Ronnie Nicole, these folks have been a heavy influence of mine just with the kind of images and art that they produce. You know, Isaac Udogwu has been a huge influence of mine in the work that they do in the worlds that they build. And I draw a lot of that, and then I just run away with it.
Man, I love the approach of putting paint where it ain't, so to speak. You saw a lack of representation, and you like, why not me? So here's the representation that was lacking.
Exactly. And that's always going to be my work. I'm always going to try to expand it. If I don't see a character, if I don't see a segment, if they say, hold on, I'm going to try and fill in there when I can. I'm going to try and put a voice there. Absolutely.
Love it. So we're gonna switch gears a little bit. So you being from the Bronx, I know you're a gigantic New York Knicks and a gigantic New York Knicks fan. So let's talk some Knicks, man. So
go for it.
So what was your earliest memories of the New York Knicks?
I grew up in the Patrick Ewing era. You know, so when I was a kid, Ewing had just gotten drafted out of Georgetown. So really, I followed Ewing from Georgetown. Georgetown at that time was New York City's unofficial squad.
Okay.
In large part because John Thompson had a crew that was all brothers, and a lot of them were from around the way. Like, it just made sense. We kind of adopted them, as many hoods around the country did. So when Ewing was drafted #1 by the Knicks, and I don't even recall paying attention to the draft. I know he was at Georgetown one day, and then he was a Knick. I started following the Knicks at that point. Right now, I had 2 men at home, an older brother and my father, who big sports fans. So I'm watching behind them and learning the game behind them. As I grew with the Knicks and as the Knicks grew, you'll remember you still had the Celtics, who were a power at that time. The Pistons were a power at that time. The Lakers were a power at that time. And I think something a lot of people maybe forget, over in the Western Conference, outside of the Lakers, the Trailblazers were a headache at that time. Like, the NBA was nothing but killers in both conferences. Good basketball, and a different kind of basketball played. I think you have a more free-flowing game now, a lot more outside shooting. At that point, when I was a kid and watching the Knicks, it was really had to be more physical than your opponent.
Yeah.
Right. And so I came up with the Knicks and grew with them as it went from Ewing and Oakley being on that team, and Bernard King being the best player on that team, and transitioning to Patrick Ewing being the best player on that team, and then Oakley being there with them, and then Anthony Mason joining the team, and John Starks joining that ball club, and Rolando Blackman joining that ball club. Those 90s Knicks especially, right? Like, they represented the city in a way, you know, hard scrabble, played the game very tough, strong defense and rebounding. And it was kind of the way we played the game on our playgrounds. You know, New York growing up, like, you couldn't call fouls. No matter what, like, you are playing, no, it's like, where's the blood, right? Just keep playing, right? So it's a part of why I think we developed so many point guards in that way. You had to be able to drive and be strong in driving and have those spatial skills to get the ball to someone so they could score, because it was an unforgiving game on the playground. Looking at the Knicks, they were a representation of us, but they broke our heart every year. Every year they broke our heart. And it wasn't always the Knicks doing. I can recall, man, feeling like with complete certainty, that squad that had Ewing and Sprewell and Allen Houston and Anthony Mason. I was like, dude, they are guaranteed to win a title. Right. And you looked around the NBA and there were still powerful squads at that time. The Bulls were still a dynasty at that point. The Celtics had gotten pretty old and the Pistons had started to really fade some at that point. But the Bulls were the dynasty then, and we were trying to get past those Bulls. And you had that retirement year. You'll remember we went to the finals against the Rockets.
Yep.
And we had Rock'em Sock'em Robots games against the Rockets all year. That series goes 7 games. And I recall in that game 7 thinking, we have this opportunity and we're in Houston, but we can close these boys out because we're tough. John Starks shoots 2 for 18, man. And I just could not, to this day, I can't see John anywhere. When I was in graduate school, he came onto the Fordham campus, right? And I was like, I cannot see this motherfucker anywhere. I'm going to be like 2 for 18, bro. Biggest game of your life. But I think being a Knicks fan, it's glorious because we love our team and there's so much history, man. But we have to love our team because there's so much heartbreak. Yeah. that comes from it. We have earned this year the team playing as well as they are with a guy like Jalen Brunson being as phenomenal as he is. Love Jalen.
Yes.
And love what he's doing, but we're dealing with injuries now, but that's a team that when everyone is healthy, we look like a squad that can be a problem.
Yeah.
We're not the best squad in the league. We're not even the best squad in the East, but I love watching that team play. Right. And that's kind of what I came up with the Knicks. It was appointment basketball. When the Knicks were playing, we didn't have cable at the time, but I could turn the radio on and listen some to the Knicks. I could crack open a newspaper and look at the box score and see how it is they did. And when I was able to see games, you remember the NBA on NBC, which was Saturday and Sunday.
Yep.
Usually Sunday. It was Saturday later in the year. But when I had the opportunity to see the Knicks play, it was like going to a movie, right? I had to be there, got to see them, because those NBA on NBC games were always big games.
Yeah.
Right. It was Knicks Bulls, Knicks Jazz, if the Knicks were going to be playing, like really, really big games. And I loved every minute of it.
Yeah, that was NBA on NBC was appointment viewing for sure.
Do you think about that era, man? We had the NBA on NBC. We had NBA Jam. Which came along in the arcades. Like NBA basketball in every way was huge. The All-Star game was appointment basketball.
Yes.
You needed to see it because the slam dunk contest, who's in the slam dunk contest?
Yes.
Who's going to win the slam? Like you had stars in it every year.
Yes.
And that's really changed. It feels like basketball is not viewed in the same way, not on the NBA level. Like folks aren't necessarily as addicted to it as I feel we were. They don't necessarily even look at the stars as profoundly huge as we did. Well, I don't know if many of the players are as good as players in the past. They're better skill-wise. Mm-hmm. But the game of basketball, to me, had to include toughness. It had to include grit. It had to include good teamwork. Right? I looked at a statistic just the other day. There was an 18-year period in the NBA where there were 8 games of 60 points or better. And just in the last 2 years, there have been like 9 games of 60 points or better. Like I don't recognize this game of basketball on the pro level from my childhood. It's very different. But no, the Knicks were amazing every year. We knew they were going to be in the playoffs every year when I was growing up, but we also knew they weren't going to win it. We were going to cheer for them anyway. And it was going to be heartbreaking, but we loved them.
Yeah. And I tell you, one of my favorite Knicks moments, or one moment that always stood out to me back in the 90s was when Derek Harper got into that scuffle with JoJo English and slung his ass into the bench.
Surely did. Yeah. No. Derek Harper was the enforcer.
Yeah.
Right. You would see him get into Anthony Mason's face. Now, you remember Anthony Mason was a Hulk.
Yeah.
Derek Harper would get in his face. He would get in Charles Oakley's face. Harper was the enforcer. He gave that team the edge. Yeah. Anytime they were stepping out, he was the general. Follow him into battle. Yeah.
Yeah. That old man's strength is undefeated. And I remember growing up watching JoJo English hoop for the Gamecocks because he was a baller at South Carolina back in the early 90s. And then I was like, man, then everybody else's memory of JoJo English was him getting
I'm getting hemmed
getting
up.
mopped up by Derek Harper. I was like, man.
Listen, I think everyone does remember how many buckets JoJo got, though.
Yeah.
Like, English was a bad man.
He
He was
was.
going to put points up.
Yes.
He was going to put them points up.
Yeah. So now, New York Giants.
Yeah. So lifelong Giants fan, right? Pretty sure you can see the banner, right?
Yes, sir.
Right up above me right there. My life as a fan of the Giants has been less painful than it has as a Knicks fan. And some of that has to do with the fact that in my lifetime, my Giants have won 4 Super Bowls.
Good point.
All right. And so I've been able to, from early childhood, know a team that for the most part has been good to great. Now, this most recent 10 to 12 years, it's been up and down. We've had the Super Bowl years mixed in with just incredible mediocrity and being outright bad.
Yeah.
But I came up in an era that was maybe the best in professional football history in New York, where there were guys who were superstars and guys who were just stars in the city, but were major contributors in the NFL. Right. So you take a guy like Lawrence Taylor, who, in my opinion, best defensive player who has ever lived. Right. You couldn't game plan for him. He was a linebacker who did a defensive end and defensive tackle job.
Yeah.
Every game. He was a disruptor. We loved LT. We knew going into every game we had him on our side of the ball. We had guys like Joe Morris, who was just a solid running back. Wasn't a star, but I knew every game Joe Morris was in there, we were going to be in good shape. Right? We had Phil Simms, just a solid QB. Right? But then on the defensive side of the ball, we had Carl Banks.
Yep.
Now, again, never a superstar, but a great player.
Yeah.
Right? Pepper Johnson came in that era. Every time I looked up, we had a guy or a set of guys who were just playing good. I remember that year we beat the 49ers in the playoffs to go to the Super Bowl in San Francisco, beat them on a field goal. And feeling and hearing and reading, the Niners' best team of that 3-4 year window, we have no chance against them. And my guys just went out and got it done.
Yep.
And then went on ahead and took care of the Bills in the Super Bowl. It was 2 straight games where you remember those Buffalo Bills teams, the ones that went to 4 straight Super Bowls. We beat them first. And the belief was we had no chance against the Bills. They scored too many points. To watch them tough that game out, right? That was Giants football under Bill Parcells. Get her done. Those defenses that were put together by Bill Belichick. Always hold guys to certain points, play the game the right way. It was just a good time watching those teams growing up. And I think Giants football, it stuck with me. It gets into your blood. I wish they were better. Naturally, I think they can make their way back because New York as a city, when our Giants and the Jets are good, it's an amazing place to be. We rock with our teams, though. We get addicted, and they're family for us. So we got to get better.
No doubt. No doubt. So it was an addition to the show notes that you provided earlier today. So, and shame on me for not bringing this up in the show notes.
Oh, no worries.
Man, you from the Bronx. We got to talk hip hop. So,
yeah.
What was your first memory of hip hop?
Early on, I mean, being right there in the BX, I think it was kind of everywhere. We started listening to a little bit of everything. My earliest memory of being really dialed in and fully attentive was when Boogie Down Productions and the Juice Crew were beefing.
Yeah.
Them going back and forth. And for me, it was obvious. It's like, I'm from the Bronx. I'm with Boogie Down Productions.
Yes.
I care nothing about the Juice Crew. But most of us didn't know everyone who was in the Juice Crew. I mean, the face of the Juice Crew was like Marley Marl. And we knew that he made beats, but when you found out later, wait a minute, Cool G Rap is with the Juice Crew, Big Daddy Kane is down with the Juice Crew. It was like, whoa. I don't know about that, but we were still rocking heavy with Boogie Down Productions. Those were kind of my earliest memories of it. And it just grew from there. Like hip hop took off. Seeing, like, I remember the Stop the Violence movement, at that point, mentioning Big Daddy Kane really being like in our eyes, like a superstar at that point. Seeing MC Light kind of carrying the banner for women in hip hop, even like watching like X Clan and Black Watch become more conscious and then leading the
Man.
way in for a lot of your native tongues. And native tongues for me personally felt so affirming, kind of being a kid who was heavy into some of that peace movement, some of conscious rap feeling good to me, being a skateboarder, being into comic books, being into anime. The native tongues movement felt like being at home. And then there were so many personalities. Man, you'll remember Me, Myself, and I by De La Soul.
Oh yeah.
Like what that felt like, just a real funky beat. And then this cat is literally just flowing over it. Then you have the Tribe Called Quest, which felt like a band for real, like a jazz band making rap music and
Yeah.
using their voices as instruments. Here is Q-Tip using his voice as an instrument. Here you have kind of a comedian, but a thorough MC, and Five Dog, who's coming across and he's so strong. Queen Latifah came along at that time, very different than MC Light in her feeling. Yo-Yo comes out of the West Coast. It took me a while to get into certain West Coast hip hop, and it really wasn't until what I think might have been the second generation
Yeah.
of West Coast hip hop I really started to tune in. Like when I first heard 93 Till Infinity, I was struck spiritually by the power of that, like how it comes in, how the beat comes in, how the beat then fully drops. I found third base to be a bit of a curiosity, at that time. I got heavy into MCs. I want to hear somebody, and I shouldn't, everyone is an MC. But some MCs are better than others, in my opinion. And so I was here for the skill. And so I readily acknowledge, right? I love De La Soul and the Tribe. You didn't have the best rappers in either group, but they made beautiful music.
Yes.
But I was going to listen heavily for, okay, who's really spitting? And so it was an atomic bomb when Nas came out, right? To hear him on Live at the BBQ and Back to the Grill Again, and then understanding how young he was, I'm like, this is the next evolution. Because before him, we really had someone like Rakim, who was just heavy. I'm just giving you nothing but lyrics on that point. And Nas was even more committed to his lyricism at that point. And it was beautiful to hear it. I think he was an amazing example of the genius that was developing with regard to lyricism. And then Common comes out of the Midwest a few years after that. And you have a guy like Biggie, who, of course, becomes the king of New York for that time and is a brilliant MC in his own right.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, I think we had such beautiful music and beautiful artists who were really giving us something to love in a lot of ways. And so hip hop was easy to listen to at that time, man. There was so much that was going on, like the kind of hip hop that we got in the 90s, man. Like all the way through the 90s, up to and including like the Rough Riders. You can put the Rough Riders anthem on right now, and people are going to feel that in their soul,
100%.
when they hear that. For me, being in high school when Camp Low dropped, them having their own language and being so smooth in their delivery. And from the Bronx, it was like, I grew up on 196 and Morris. They were on 192nd and like Valentine. So I'm like, man, those are cats that are from just 3 neighborhoods over. It's beautiful that they're in this space. Having Fat Joe come along and Big Pun later on, bring that kind of energy. Like the Roots even. Well, I think the Roots are so underappreciated, right? Based on the kind of energy that they brought, which was we in fact want to make heavy instrumental band-focused kind of music and music with meaning. It was incredible. Bahamadia making her way with those folks. There was so much at that time where I found myself loving every new artist that was dropping because of what they brought with them. Joe Budden, being as incredible as he was, when he first came out, just you could see the incredible talent that existed with him, and we wanted more for him and from him. It was an amazing time to be alive, to know that, no, dude, every week something's gonna drop, whether it was a single or an album, and we were gonna be able to go out, look at who produced it, who were all of the features, and have ourselves a good time with it.
Yeah. Oh man, reading the liner notes.
We had to have it. That's why you had to have a CD.
Yeah, that was
Before you
special.
even put it on, you pull that liner right out of the front.
Mm-hmm.
Who are the credits? Who's the thank yous? All of that. You think about it, and I can recall hearing Reasonable Doubt, the first time and thinking, man, folks are not really appreciating as much as they should. And knowing Jay-Z was sandwiched kind of between Nas and Biggie. We didn't have any good sense of what he might become, but at the time when he dropped it, he was a brilliant MC, but you had LL Cool J was still going hard making music. DMX was not far behind. You had a cat like Nas who was still right there in the midst of his power. Biggie was right there in the midst of his power. Foxy Brown and Little Kim were in the midst of their power as women MCs. It was, I think, challenging for him to come forward, but you could see what was on the way. And I think the 90s gave us an era where you could see so much of what was coming forward. Like hip hop really took 1 to 10 big steps forward. Yep. In terms of creativity, in terms of even, goals. What can we be? Are we going to be international? And that's what it became, fundamentally. And I think gave birth to a lot of very interesting groups that exist now. You come out of the 90s where you have someone like MF Doom, who is a member of a group, moves away from that. Really a group that was secondary to third base at that time.
KMD.
Loses his brother. He goes solo. And there's no one who you could talk to who would tell you that his brand of rap would be a popular brand of rap. And not that everyone knows him, but his fans are legion. And we didn't know that we needed that. We didn't know that we needed the Mos Def. But when he gave us what he gave, so a Talib Kweli, Reflection Eternal being one group, but then them coming together.
Yeah,
Black Star, we need that. Yeah. Right? And when we're hearing it, it's like it's so powerful that we are hearing this. And now, what more are you going to give us? Company Flow was giving us a particular kind of Jedi Mind Tricks was giving us. We didn't know we needed this, but we needed it. Right? It was incredible music. And then you had the South make its way into the conversation. In those early works, right? Listening to, and no hate to Big Boy, but Andre 3000 is a different kind of animal.
Yeah.
Right. And by that, I mean, everything he spits is so heavy and so informed and enlightened and just so excellent when he comes through. I think we've had so many eras, but the era that I grew up with, with hip hop, which was in the 90s, it felt like the best era to me in many ways. And we had everyone making their contributions, right? I think of how much I loved the Far Side in the 90s. When they were making music, right? It felt in many ways like everyone was kind of finding their footing. Everyone was kind of making their case. You did have the East Coast, West Coast beef, but the South was really starting to bubble. And then the Midwest, a few years after, kind of joined in. But once the South made its way in, and this is something I've seen about all parts of the South supports the South.
Yep.
In every way. If you go and make some plates, your people who love you are going to buy them plates. And it's been that attitude and approach with hip hop. Don't matter if you listen to Big Crit or not, we're going to listen to Big Crit. It doesn't matter if you listen to the No Limit Soldiers, that's our rap. We're going to listen to it, right? So folks were able to, I think, in the South be like, y'all ain't listening to us. I'm going to sell it directly to my people. New York and the West Coast was still waiting to get record deals from major labels. And you weren't official if you didn't have a record deal.
Yeah.
Right. And some of the best groups of all time had that sensibility. I have to do it from the Wu-Tang Clan starts with we're making our music and we're taking it to the people. But that was exemplified 10,000 times over in the South. I remember living in Atlanta when Big Oomp Records was out. And those folks were like, no, man, we're going to open the doors. Yes. Everybody come in here and buy something. You know what I'm saying? I looked at what was the feel of the hustle to make this thing happen. We're going to love our voice. We're going to buy our product. We're going to promote our stars. And that's a lot of what I want to see South Carolina do with all of the arts, truly.
Yeah, it's moving units out the trunk of their car, man, and nothing like it.
For sure. Absolutely.
So now we're going to get into the 5-question segment of the program. First and last question are the same question I ask every guest I have on here. Questions 2 through 4 with possible bonus questions will be
Okay.
100% random. So question number one, what were
Mm.
Napoleon's go-to school lunch items?
Ooh, damn, chocolate milk was a school lunch item for sure. Doritos was another school lunch item. And I mean, oddly enough, I liked it when we had pot pies. They weren't necessarily
Yeah.
amazing, but they were filling. So I'd
Yes.
say those were my three. Definitely chocolate milk, Doritos, pot pies. Those three.
That's a perfect description. They weren't amazing, but
Yeah,
they were filling. They
they were
got the
filling. Yes,
job
sir.
done.
Hmm.
Question number two. What's that one song that immediately makes you want to get up and dance?
That is a good one. One song that makes me want to get up and dance. Probably Lucchini by Camplo. Like I hear Lucchini. I mean, when it comes in, it's real smooth. That horn comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, I get on my feet immediately, no matter where I am. And I don't hear Lucchini as much as I want to, but Lucchini is that one. Yeah, Lucchini gets me like I get a good little shoulder lean and bop when I hear Lucchini come on.
Yes, sir. Them horns will make you stand at
That's
attention.
what does it.
Yes. Question number three. Who was the first Knicks player that made you say the sooner he leaves this team, the better?
Ooh, I want to say Charles Smith, but no, Charles Smith was okay for a couple of years. It was an Italian player. I forget his name. He was a number one pick. We traded the Raptors to get him. He was a bum. I don't want to do it to Charles Smith, but I might have to. Yeah, Charles Smith, man.
Okay.
Charles Smith.
Let's see. Question number four is actually courtesy of the homie Jonesy Stark.
Okay.
He says, how do you motivate yourself to do the work daily? He said that question is in regard to marriage, parenting, professional life, creators, or creative endeavors.
Yeah. I think there are a few things, as a father and as a husband, I try to remind myself that my family deserves the best version of me, but they also deserve to see the version of me that needs rest and to recuperate and isn't at its best, isn't at his best, and can apologize when he needs to. They deserve to see the best and imperfection. They deserve to see growth and the outcome, right? So I'm motivated to continually be in a growth process for my family, right? When it comes to work, I want to continue to be the best, but I want to infiltrate as many communities as I can and bring health and wellness to them, right? When it comes to writing, I don't only want to write important works, I also want to be wealthy for others, right? Like I want to be able to take good care of my loved ones, but I don't want to just have money in the pocket, and I don't want to be famous because I don't want to be behind a velvet rope. I want to be able to take good care of people, but I want to entertain people. I want them to think and be thoughtful. I want them to understand certain things about themselves. What has me focused on doing the good work is I saw at home, being a son of an alcoholic and a mother who struggled. Life is hard, right? And people are trying their best, and they sometimes don't have the best tools to work with because of what their families gave them.
Yeah.
So a part of my focus on working hard and continuing to push through, and what wakes me up in the morning is, man, can I do better work now? Can I be a better version? Can I break some of those generational curses? Can I give the world good work, man? Can I be a sex symbol? Can I be an inspiration? Can I make it so that some youngsters want to be a psychologist or a healer, or they want to be a writer, or they want to just be a good dad, be present in the life of his sons, be a good friend, be intentional with your friends. I want for everyone where you are concerned. No, and I'm saying to everybody, listen, don't just listen to this podcast, share this podcast, stream this podcast, put this podcast on. Even if you don't have the time while you're working, leave it on in the background. The idea of support is it doesn't just come in one way, right? We want to see Danny do 10 times what he's doing now, 100 times after that, and then 1,000 after that. We want this brother to be able to take his voice and the love that he has for us and to share that with other people. That's a lot of the intent and support we have to have. I want to be that kind of supporter of those who I support and those who I love. I want to see our very best out there.
Very well said. Question number four. What do you like least about Columbia?
What I like least about Columbia? Traffic. Traffic. Like, there's no good reason for a city the size of Columbia to have as much traffic as it has. Like Columbia, certain parts of the day on the highways and on the roads has traffic like it's LA or New York. And during the middle of the day, there's nothing going on in Columbia that requires that kind of traffic. So I would say it's the traffic, man. I wish it wasn't what it was. And I don't live in Columbia proper, but to have to go into Columbia and be confronted with it,
Gets
the
old
traffic
quick.
is definitely, yeah, it gets old very quickly.
And then last question. What was the last thing that really made you laugh?
Ooh, I was speaking with my son about movies, actually, and his opinion of movies. And his opinion is so very, like, myself and my wife have emphasized we want him to feel how he feels about things and to think for himself. And he's a hysterical kid, because he'll bring a point of view that I think is from his age. And I think about films, and though we disagree, we can laugh our way through a disagreement. Right. And at times when I think he feels so strongly about his opinion about some films, we saw Argyle over the weekend and chuckled some about how kind of uneven a film it was and whether it was a good film or not. And we talked some about Cowboy Bebop and which version is the best and which anime has the best dub of all time and why. And we talked a little bit about Barbie. Now that I've seen it, the missus and the son saw it before I did. Like, I really laughed my heart out listening to him talk about films and his opinion on them, even as young as he is. I got a good chuckle thinking about, you know what, man, I would not have been able to express this opinion to my dad at this age.
Yeah.
and it feels beautiful to be able to be here in those moments with him.
Beautiful, man. Thank you so much for being a guest on here. Seriously.
Yes, sir.
This
is a pleasure.
Bro, you dropped some serious gems, man. And I greatly appreciate you. Honestly, one of the reasons why I appreciate you is because you indirectly taught me how to lean into my greatness more. And I love how you always push that. And I'm eternally grateful for that. Seriously.
Yeah, listen, brother, you deserve it, man. I know just from a distance some of what you have lived with in your life and what you've pushed through, and how you've arrived here, man. It takes greatness to be able to do so. And sometimes, man, greatness is a process.
It is.
But I think it doesn't happen in isolation. And so a part of what I want to see, man, like, I'm blessed to know a society of weirdos, and you are in that group, and I'm in that group. And we have good friends who are in that group. Preacher's in that group. Corey Davis is in that group. Jonesy is in that group. Dre Lopez is in that. Like, I want to see us get to a point where we kind of take the reins of many of the voices in this state and we just pull them forward. Right. I want to see us all do great here, man, because Carolina got a lot to say. Carolina 100%. Got a whole lot to say. Yeah,
that's a great way to end the podcast, man.
For sure.
Thank y'all for listening to Since We Last Spoke. Make sure you like, download, or subscribe to Since We Last Spoke with Danny Foxworth. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm at Danny Foxworth 843. You can find all of the video versions of all of my episodes for this podcast, as well as my baseball podcast at The Plate with Danny Foxworth. And for Napoleon and myself, this has been another episode of Since We Last Spoke. And until next time, y'all be good. Peace. Yeah.